Hello and welcome to the very first episode of The Inquiry Room. I'm Charlotte Snowden, the Managing Director of Action Learning Associates. And The Inquiry Room is a space where we're going to explore leadership, learning, conversations that will help people think differently. In each episode, we'll be joined by different leaders, facilitators, practitioners and thinkers who are passionate about helping people and organisations to learn, grow and navigate complex challenges. And today I'm delighted to be joined by someone who has played a significant part and did a role in the development and growth of action learning across UK and beyond. And she is Ruth Cook. Ruth founded Action Learning Associates in 1998 and has spent many years helping leaders, teams and organisations use action learning to tackle real challenges, develop leadership capability and create lasting change. Many of the facilitators and action learning programmes in the organisation today have been influenced directly and indirectly by Ruth's work. Her thinking, experience and commitment to the discipline have also helped shape the practice of action learning for countless individuals and organisations. So I'm now welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on and join me and for the first episode. Thank you very much. So just over to you to sort of say, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey around action learning.
I first came across action learning probably in the mid-1990s. Shows how old I was. I was at the time I'd come from a community work background, and then I'd worked in equalities, and then I was thrown into a huge management role in local government, sorting out housing benefit. And anyone who knows anything about the housing benefit service knows that it is often in a mess, and this in an inner London borough was definitely in a mess, and I was asked to go in and sort it out. And I really had nobody to talk about that with. My boss was running his empire and I was just a part of it, and the politicians were just like, sort it out, Ruth, we know you can do it, sort it out. And I really didn't have anybody that I could talk about. Yeah, but what do I do? What's acceptable to the trade unions? How do I mold the senior leadership team so they take on this challenge, etc. And I came across action learning, and I joined an action learning set run by Roger Gaunt, and that set ended up going on in a self-facilitated way for about 20 years. It was the place where I could talk about what do I really do, and how do I solve this bit and that bit, and was very, very important to me.
So what was it about action learning then that captured your attention so much that it made it was not only a passion, but then you created and inspired you to develop Action Learning Associates?
Yes, well, I'd done an MBA with the Open University, so I felt like I'd got the kind of theoretical knowledge that I needed. But what struck me about action learning was the fundamental belief that the answer is within the person themselves. The answer is within me, and the skill is therefore asking really good questions, probing, challenging questions that are going to bring that answer out. That's what I loved about action learning, and the kind of deep listening that's necessary as well.
Yeah, and it's that reflection, or just that space, isn't it, that really does come through a lot.
Yes, and that most leaders don't get the space to think. That's what I loved.
And moving from obviously setting up Action Learners as associates, what inspired you to make that shift and that jump?
Yeah, well, I never intended to set up a company. I was just, I'd worked as a trainer for a training organisation, and then I decided to go solo, become self-employed. But the demand for action learning grew, and I guess I was fortunate enough to be setting it up just as people were hearing about action learning in the UK and were interested in it. So the demand was greater than I could provide. So again, it just grew organically as the demand grew. I could also see the benefit of a group of practitioners having space to explore it between themselves as well. So how can we all get better at action learning as well as introducing other people to it?
And did you ever imagine that the organisation would grow as much and what it has become today?
No, I don't think so. I certainly didn't start with any sense of an internationally well-known organization. I Yeah, I also didn't at that point know the potential with online action learning. So that changed the scale and the scope of the work that we did. And I guess the other shift that's happened over time is that we started off going into companies, going into organizations and offering them skilled action learning facilitation. And then it developed to the point where we were then being asked, well, can you train us as facilitators? And so we developed a facilitation course and we had it registered with the Institute of Leadership and Management. So that again, that shift led to a growth because there weren't at the time, there weren't many other people offering facilitation training, and I could see that that was much more cost effective for companies and international non-governmental organizations and charities.
Yeah. Then definitely just, well, building this skill and capability in-house is really critical because, we have a lasting effect on a wider scale in that way rather than just being with individuals.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're
So
leaving them with that potential. You're not just going in, running something great and then disappearing. You're leaving with them with the potential to take it forward.
And if you think back, what are you most proud of, or what has really been your key highlight of all of those years?
Ooh, that's a hard question. I've loved some of the big programs that we've done. I think about Heineken, for example, where we worked with them for quite a few years, and we trained 150 of their managers, and they then delivered action learning globally to 2,000 first line managers. And these were kind of like brewery supervisors, people who'd never done anything like this, in that they weren't all human resources people who came and trained as facilitators. So it was an international program that ran and was independently evaluated as being the most valuable element of the first line management program that they ran and rolled out globally. So yeah, I love those big pieces of work. I love the way that organizations have made it their own. So another example would be Oxfam, where we trained some facilitators. Those facilitators then set up action learning within Oxfam as part of their global leadership program. So they would have people come in from all over the world, and they'd work on theory and get some input in the mornings, and then they do action learning in the afternoon. And that seemed like a brilliant way to again to introduce action learning up to scale.
I always love that, the way that different organisations embed it and tweak it to actually really get to their core and their culture and how it operates for them the most effectively.
Yes.
So as we know, action learning is obviously associated Reg Revans, if I can spit out his name. And for people who are quite unfamiliar with him, who is Reg Revans and why does that still matter today? And how has he influenced, obviously, the work that you've done?
Yes. I think that Reg had an enormous influence on the way in which action learning has developed globally, partly because he refused to say this is action learning and that isn't. So he gave us the kind of essence of it, and then people could adapt it for very different purposes. So I think that was a pretty fantastic legacy from Reg. And one of the things that interested me when I read about Reg Revans's life was that he was a Quaker, and I happen to be a Quaker. And for those who don't know anything about Quakers, it's broadly Christian based, but not entirely. A lot of people have come from a Buddhist route and have been doing meditation practice, as I had for many years. And so it's a group of people who meet together regularly without priests, without vicars, sit in a circle and sit in silence, and then anyone can speak from the silence if they feel moved to speak. So certainly I know from my own Quaker meeting in Bradford-on-Avon in Somerset, that when people are really troubled about what's going on in the world, then our numbers go up enormously, because it's a place where people can come, and they know that Quakers have traditionally been very passionate about peace and been conscientious objectors, and people can come there and talk about how they're responding to what's going on in the world, or just sit in silence. So we know, and Reg wasn't particularly public about this, but we know that he did attend a Quaker meeting in Cambridge when he lived in Cambridge. And there's a Quaker practice which is called meetings for clearness. And it's very similar to action learning. So I do feel a bit aggrieved that Reg Evans never acknowledged where it came from. But a meeting for clearness is where somebody in the Quaker meeting can ask their meeting to help them with usually a problem, a situation, a challenge that they face. And they select a few people to help them. And those people sit in a circle with them. The person describes what it is they need help with, and the people in the circle then ask them questions, and they come up with their answer in time, with a lot of silence in between. And that is the essence of action learning. So it's a Quaker practice that goes back to the 17th century. And we've adapted it. We've adapted it all these years later.
Yeah. And it's sort of, I think the key elements for me around action learning is very much around that space, the reflective opportunity, and the support to find your own way forward through them questions from the group, rather than just being what quite common you get now is being told what to do and hope for the best, and you go and try and put it into practice. The similarities there are really sort of took through from the Quaker world into action learning as well.
And people can think of it as very supportive. And of course it is, but actually it's also really challenging, because people are probing and pushing and exploring things that may be uncomfortable for you, with good intent, but it is a challenging process if it's working well.
Yeah, but I think that it's that, isn't it? It's the positive intent, the way it's all set up. It's around that positivity, around supporting that person. Yeah, even though it's challenging, still holding that person in a lot of ways in order to support them through the challenge, or help them find their ways.
Yeah. And part of the process we use is also to offer feedback or reflections to that individual once they've got to their action points. And I now work with a lot of senior chief executives, people running organisations, and they don't very often get that honest feedback from a group of peers who've got no interest other than their best intent, but no interest in the outcome. So people can get to a certain point in their career where they don't get that kind of feedback, and it's really useful to have that from a group of peers.
Yeah, and I've been talking to some of the people that have done our action learning sets outside of any of the facilitator training, but just the action learning, and what they found most valuable is that sort of space to just, I'm isolated, I'm in a single role in my organisation, I can't really talk to the people in the organisation, so actually just having that peer support and opportunity is really, really supportive for them. And I know you continue to facilitate a CEO set at the moment, and senior leaders. So what do you think those, obviously we've talked about a couple of bits there, but what else makes those conversations different and I guess valuable for them individuals?
Yes, so they come from a variety of different professional backgrounds, different sectors, they've got different experience of running organisations. So it's also kind of fresh eyes looking at what you bring to the action learning set. And I guess with chief executives, it's very often the stuff that they can't talk about with anyone else. So it's what goes on in the action learning set is absolutely confidential. People sign up to a really strict confidentiality agreement, and they know they can talk about the board, their senior leadership team, the kind of problem or challenge that it's really hard to talk to anyone else about.
What do you think you've learned from working with leaders? Because every time you join a set or you're part when I facilitate, you learn so much. And I think I think that's the surprise. Like people go away going, I wasn't the person presenting, but I've learned so much. So what have you learned from over the years? And if you can, is there any one or two things that you could summarize?
I mean, I've always found it fascinating getting insights into different organizations and different sectors and different ways of working. I think what I've learned is that there are very many different styles of asking questions, and people can get a bit stuck in asking a certain sort of question, and actually someone can then come in from left field and ask something that cuts across and is really an insightful question because they've listened and listened. And so I always learn from the process. You've never got to the point with action learning where you can't learn anymore. There's always, something to learn from every set that you facilitate. And I'm still a member of an action learning set. So I also have a group of peers, and we mostly run action learning companies. So we trust each other, and I can bring things about the development of the company to them. That's really valuable.
And you not only you've done CEO sets, but actually you've worked with hundreds of organisations and thousands of people where you've developed them from a facilitator's point of view. When you think about working with those, what do you think people misunderstand about action learning when they either join or originally don't really know, or pop along to a facilitator training and think it's something quite different?
I think people quite often think of it as just a problem-solving technique. And it's much more than that, and they realize after a while that they're going to get a lot more from that. I think also what you just spoke about, that people assume, I mean, when I'm describing action learning in advance to people and they say, well, if there's 6 or 8 people, I might only get 2 or 3 chances to present something in the lifetime of a set. And what they can't imagine at that point is how valuable it is just to be part of the experience, what they're going to gain from being a member of the set, even if they don't present. And usually after a couple of sessions, people really understand that I don't need to be the presenter in order to get something valuable. And when we do that final round of giving reflections to the presenter, we also share, what have you learned? And people often talk in some depth about what they've learned from that presentation.
I always find when we train some of the facilitators, if they're coming along and they've not really had that background and there's a little bit of resistance there, I always find it fascinating. The first 2 days they stay resistant, but by the time they get to like day 3 and day 4, they're like, oh, I get it now. And actually I can see the place. So I never challenge them on it because I just love the journey that they seem to go through, and all of a sudden that's what really surprises me. They go, okay, and they become real advocates of it as well.
The people who've had most resistance often end up as the biggest advocates. And it's like when we're running a facilitated training program, I agree, it kind of goes through a dip where people are like, what is this? And then they get it, and then they're ready to run by the end. It's important that it takes place over time. It really annoys me that people offer an introduction to action learning facilitation for 1 day, and it's like, there's so much to learn. You need a group to practice those things with, either in your organization or across organizations. And and you would lose so much just getting an outline. Well, this is what the facilitator does. It's much more than
and I've seen it, like when people have been part of an action learning set, have then tried to facilitate it, and it hasn't gone so well, because it's such a difference between understanding the process and I guess having a sense of how it should run, to then facilitating something like that to get the best outcomes for the people involved is quite different.
And that ability to hold the process and hold the individuals in the set. I've seen I've heard about some really bad practice of, putting people in a room together and here's a handout on, so take it in turns to facilitate and then just get on with it. And actually, I think that's irresponsible and potentially even dangerous, because you're asking people to talk about big things and things that might make them feel quite vulnerable. And you need someone who's skilled at holding them and holding the group and holding the process, without being rigid about it, but just there's a safety in a well-trained facilitator.
So I'm going to take you a little bit further forward now. So the work, obviously, the world of work and the organisations and business is really rapidly changing, and we're seeing AI, automation, and I guess the complexity of organisations and the constant pressure on leaders is really, I guess, a high at the moment, and it's, you know, a constant change, and I don't think it'll ever change. We just got to adapt to get used to that. But do you still believe that action learning is relevant in this world, and ultimately how you can see that, you know, supporting some of this rather than it being something that people forget about?
Yeah, absolutely. In a way, all that you've described is exactly why it is still relevant and still useful for organisations to do. I think also the other thing I'd throw in is the pace of change. You know, people and organisations are having to adapt continually, and things move on so quickly that to just stop and take stock and think about, how am I doing? What am I doing? What's working? What's not working? You know, AI is never going to give you those answers. You need time and human company, I believe, to develop the answers for yourself.
And I do think actually action learning could really help them embed and support some of the changes a lot more than what their organisations are using it for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it'd be nice to see that sort of, you know, I guess moving forward, them seeing, you know, it's when they're implementing AI and automation, that's a very transactional process, but actually underneath it's the humans that actually need to adopt it, play with it and get it on board. And actually action learning can really help and support companies actually implement that and give people the opportunity to come together and talk about why they, you know, either worried about AI or find it challenging, and how they could actually start to embrace it and help each other embrace it a little bit.
Yes, we've very often been used when either an organisation or a sector is going through massive change, then to use action learning as a way of processing that and working out how you're going to respond. Yeah.
So just coming to the end, but a couple of quick questions for you. So what's the most memorable action learning moment that you've ever had?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I think I'd like to skip that one. I'm not sure. I can remember some action learning moments for myself. I mean, I couldn't talk about the content of any other action learning set, could I? But for myself, I can remember questions that people have asked me that have just stayed with me, and they've been a kind of guide as I've gone through maybe a tricky point, either in the development of the company or things going on around me, and I've just had that question in my head. So that's been a gift from that individual. Yes, I think I'd probably say that rather than experience of working with organisations. Yeah.
And have you ever, I always ask people to try and remember the questions that get asked, or if there is a real significant one, but is there any best question you've ever heard of in a set or any of the training that you've done that you've thought, actually, that's really had an impact?
I wouldn't say a best question, because I think it's so specific to what the conversation is about. But I think that ability to really listen to the answer and to then go one deeper and ask the question that follows on from the answer. Or sometimes there's a really powerful technique of just going, and then or asking the question again. You know, when you feel like someone's just skating across and giving the answer that everyone expects, just asking it again is quite challenging, or just saying, and what else? And we get so used to kind of just instantly giving an answer because that's what's expected of us most of the time. And that opportunity to listen to your own answer, reflect, and then go a bit deeper.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the questions I love is always why, because it's almost like, well, why is that so important to you? No, but really, why is it important to you? Because by the time you're starting to get to that level, people are really thinking about, well, why am I so bothered by this?
Yeah.
So it is that sort of next layer or two down, isn't it?
And it's interesting that people who've come from a counselling background get told never to ask why questions. But actually, it depends on the tone in which you ask why and the context. And in action learning, it can be very useful. Why did you do that? Yep, just tell us why you did that. Is not a judgmental question. It's a just let's open it up a bit more.
So as someone who's obviously delivered lots of facilitator training, is there any like biggest lesson you've had as a result of that, or what is it across all of the facilitator training you've done? Is there anything that stands out?
I guess I've learnt not to create any expectations about who's going to be good at this. You might think HR professionals, that's, they're going to have a natural inclination towards this work, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they can be too kind of gathering evidence kind of in there, because that's what they do in other situations. Or some people are just really surprising in their ability to ask good questions, to really listen and ask good questions. And I've learned not to judge that in advance, either by profession or status, or just be open and get to know people and create an atmosphere in which they can learn. I guess that's what I love about the facilitator training, that and then people finding their own style and then adapting action learning to their organization, taking it back and making it their own, holding on to the essence, of course, but taking it back and adapting is just great.
Cool. Well, thank you. But one final question for me before I close is, after all of the years working with leaders, organisations, and obviously action learning, what's the one message you would like listeners to take away from the conversation today?
I think leaders, above all else, have to learn to listen. That, they're creating space around them, and when they're in an organisation, creating the potential to listen to people at all different levels of the organisation and all different parts, if it's international or a big national organisation. So, or even if it's a small community organisation, actually listening to the caretaker, listening to the receptionist, and really understanding what's going on and enabling them to be honest about what they need from you as a leader.
Well, Ruth, thank you so much for joining us today and for being the first guest on, hopefully, a good inquiry room as it moves forward, but also for sharing your experience, wisdom and reflections of the years of experience that you have brought to ALA as well. It's been fascinating to hear not only the story behind Action Learn Associates, but also why it was important to you, and obviously the Quakerism and why it still remains important today. So thank you very much. Before we finish, I'd love our listeners to think about one final question. So not for you, but for these guys when they are listening, is what questions do you think leaders should be asking themselves right now? Please leave comments, share your thoughts back in the comments below. But ultimately, if you've enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, follow and share the Inquiry Room. And if you want to learn more about Action Learn Associates, then the work we do, you'll find our links, resources in the description, and obviously our website. But until next time, thank you very much for joining us in the Inquiry Room, and thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.